How are you guys doing this morning? It is so good to see you. Great to be connecting with everybody who's joining us online as well. If you're waking up feeling more exhausted than you were when you went to sleep, you're not alone. According to new research, the average American wakes up feeling like they had a good night's sleep 3 times in 7 days. 3 times a week, you feel like, yeah, that was about what I was trying to accomplish when I laid my head down at night. A survey of over 2,000 adults reported the average person doesn't get anywhere near the quantity of sleep they desire. 60% of people are looking for 8 hours of sleep, but only getting 6 hours of sleep on a regular basis. Part of the struggle is that it's taking time to even get ready to go to sleep and to be able to get into a spot where they're able to fall asleep. 66% of the surveyed adults said it takes 2 hours just to be able to wind down and to be able to sleep, especially if you have kids. If you have kids, and those of you parents who are going through the parent routine of trying to go through getting everybody to bed and baths and all that kind of stuff, it's especially difficult to be able to have that wind down happen because the day has been so long and there's been so many different things going on. But a big part of that wind down is also connected to the fact that 50% of Americans are bringing work home with them and doing work in those off times in the evening before bed in ways that are not necessarily compensated. 10% are doing it every day. 27% report that they just don't have enough time to do the job that they're being asked to do, and that's why they're working extra hours at home. And 66% report working on tight deadlines or demanding schedules to be at the speed that the place they're working at, operating at, is the reason why they're working so many hours at home. Now, lay alongside that some data that came out just last month or 2 months ago in March when we had the Gallup poll talking about religious participation among people who go to church. 20 years ago, 42% of America went to church every single Sunday or basically every single Sunday. Now they're saying 30%. That there's like 21% are going almost every week or every week, and then another 9% that are right behind that virtually every week. There's a lot of shifting that's going on, but when you look at how tired everybody is, and you look at also how disconnected spiritually people are from God and from each other, it paints a fairly worn out and disconnected picture of the state of faith life in America. And I think that's part of what makes a conversation that we're going to have today so relevant and practical for all of us as we begin to kind of look at life and wonder, what would God say to this? Like maybe even ask the question, does God have a plan to keep us all refreshed? If we were to ask him directly, I think he would say, yep, and you can trace it all the way back to the Old Testament. We've been looking specifically at a group of commands that God gave the Israelites in Exodus chapter 20. 10 commandments that he said were going to set his nation apart. This was going to set his people apart. They would have his value. They would start to take on his likeness and be made into his image if they lived and operated like this. We've been 3 weeks in. This is week 4. And the 4th commandment, Exodus chapter 20, verse 8 says this: remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that's in them. But he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. There's a couple things about this commandment that are interesting to me. One is it's the wordiest. Of all the things that he says, of all the commandments that he gives, this one's the wordiest. He has the most explanation and application of the commandment here than any other verse. The other thing that's really interesting to me is it's referenced way more than any other commandment in the Bible. In the Old Testament, referenced over 100 times after this event. We don't have anything close to that kind of frequency for the other 9 commandments. So it's a big deal to God. And I want to try to paint a little bit of a picture before we try to bring it into life today. Kind of paint a holistic biblical picture of what does this word, what is this concept, what is this practice and principle, command to honor the Sabbath mean to us today? Let's understand a couple things. First, about the word. The word means stop working. Okay, stop working. That's what the word means. Okay, got that? So it's a day that's set aside to not work. But maybe more specifically, it's important to notice that in the Bible, when Sabbath is talked about, it's really talking about two particular finished works of God that once he was done, he rested. He rested. Two things that God did that when he was done with, he rested. The first one is creation. Creation. And we heard that in this commandment, that this commandment connects back to creation. Like God created the earth in 6 days and rested on the seventh, therefore honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. This is the one of 9 commandments that goes all the way back to the beginning of time. Like what I'm saying is it didn't originate here in this text with Moses. It goes clear back to creation. It's tied back to the creation ordinance where God established his original work, creating the world in 6 days. Genesis chapter 2, verse 2 says this, that on the seventh day, God finished the work he had been doing, and on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day. He made it holy because on it, he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So God rests on the seventh day because he was clearly exhausted, right? He was exhausted. You would be, after you created the world, you'd need a break. You'd need an Arnold Palmer, and you'd need a nice, comfortable chair, and it'd be time to sit down. Right? Is that what God was doing? He was like, I'm tired. Been busting it for a few days, 6 to be exact, so I am ready for a breather. No, that's not what God was doing. He wasn't taking a break because he was tired. So rest in our mind sometimes is connected to tired, but for God, rest is connected to the job's done. I rested on the seventh day because I had created everything that there was to create. I did it in 6. I rested on 7. God tells us, the Bible tells us not because God was tired, but because he was finished. And even in the wording in Genesis of the creation account, there's a couple interesting things to notice. One is every time God would he'd do a day's worth of work, it would say this at the end, and there was evening and there was morning on the first day. And there was evening and there was morning on the second day. Evening, morning, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. When we get to the second or the seventh, it doesn't word it like that. It doesn't word it like that. It just said God blessed the seventh day, made it holy, because on it he rested from the work of creating that he had done. Part of the reason I think the wording is different is because there was a completion to everything that was done. It was done. And now we are living in that created, finished work. There didn't need to be the same rhythm that was after day 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, because at 7, we wrapped this thing up. And now life on earth is rolling. And it's moving forward inside of this concept of God's work to create was done. It was finished. And so he rested. One of the things, and you might have heard it even as I said it, that's interesting is that it always would say, and it was evening and it was morning on the first day. Evening and morning on the second day. We would typically, in our Western thought, American thought, we would go morning, evening. Well, that's strange. That's different. We think of the day beginning when the sun comes up and ending when it goes down. But in the Jewish way of thought, it's actually different. It's actually the day begins when the sun goes down. And so in that, there's almost already like this subtle repositioning of God's perspective on life and our perspective on life, where we rest from work, and he's like, I work from rest. The day begins with resting in who I am. So one connection for Sabbath, creation. The other connection is salvation. It's connected to God's saving work in the life of Israel, and then eventually, ultimately, through Jesus. 40 years after this moment that we just read about, where Moses gives the 10 Commandments, the people are in the wilderness about to enter the promised land. And the law is reread and almost like renewed and recommitted to. And there we have in Deuteronomy 5 this list of the same 10 Commandments. But when we get to the Sabbath, instead of connecting back to the creation ordinance, it connects to the salvation experience from being delivered in Egypt. Deuteronomy 5:15 says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord God brought you out with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. not because necessarily it was a creation order, but in this moment, God emphasizes, you do this because it's an opportunity to remember you are my people, and I've saved you, and I have brought you out of slavery and now into a new life, into a new world. This is ultimately fulfilled in Jesus. And this command is that's why this commandment is different than almost all the other ones that we will look at, is that there is a fulfillment in Jesus that takes us to a place where the ritual observation of this concept of Sabbath changed with him. How did it change with him? Well, it changed with him because he became the embodiment of the Sabbath. In fact, a lot of the things that Jesus did was done on the Sabbath, and it caused a lot of uproar among a lot of religious leaders. Said, you can't work on the Sabbath. You can't heal people. You can't save people. You can't do things that would be good for people because that's work, and you can't do that on Sabbath. And Jesus would say, the man was not made for Sabbath, the Sabbath for man. I am the Sabbath. I am the rest that you have for me. He would say, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. But maybe the clearest picture is in Hebrews chapter 1, where it says, the Son, Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. And after he had provided purification for sin, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty in heaven. Notice that part about he sat down. This is the other finished work. The first one was creation. The second one is salvation. After providing purification for sins, Jesus sat down. Why? Because he was tired? Because he was done. Because it was finished. Because he had paid the price. The job was complete. His saving work transformed our understanding of the Sabbath. The early church shifted the observation of this Sabbath idea from the seventh day to the first day in honor of the resurrection of Jesus. Sunday became then the day that was the day people gathered for worship, the day that people gathered and set aside as their special day. Hebrews going on in chapter 4 says this, that there remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their work, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter into that rest. Kind of a paradoxical statement. Let us make every effort to enter into that rest. It seems like make every effort and rest just don't fit together. Make every effort. No, I want to rest from making every effort. Make every effort to enter into that rest. And that rest, as I highlighted, not in a day, but in a person. But putting it all together, the Sabbath, in its principle, is about setting one day a week aside to gather for worship, to stop working, to find rest in Jesus. This has been God's plan from the beginning. And I say it's a principle more than it is even a command, because we see in Jesus now a fulfillment that takes us to a new place. Paul would even say, don't be judgmental to people about the way certain holy days are observed. This would kind of fit into that category. But the principle is one that is rock solid and will stand the test of time, is that God has set into the human DNA a rhythm for refreshment. And when we live outside of that rhythm, we suffer. That rhythm is designed that one day in 7 is set aside to stop working, to worship, to focus on relationships, and allow God to do a work in us and through us that we could not do if we simply worked over and over and over and over again without ceasing. Some of us have to ask the question, which way do I do life? Am I doing life out of rest? Like I'm gassed, I have no rest, I'm empty. Or out of rest, do I do life? And maybe a way to answer the question for you would be to ask this question honestly. Is Sunday my crescendo or my crash? Like, is this the day that is my favorite day because it gets to be about the best things and everything that I want and need for my life and for my relationships and for my soul? Or is this a day where the work of the week dominates and I'm simply trying to recover on this day? It's a challenge in today's world and culture, with demands that are all the time, with work demands that are all the time, travel demands, school demands, sports demands for kids that are all week long, to set a time and a day aside to do it. What is your place? What is your place? How do you get to that place of rest? I read a book recently by an author named Kevin DeYoung, and he talked about the practice that his family embraced of setting Sunday aside and the work that it took for him to be able to do that and to really guard that day. But he said over time what was cultivated was this, and I love the way he worded this. He said, Sunday has become for our family an island of get to in an ocean of have to. Life is full of have tos. There's a lot of have to do's. There's a lot of stuff that's going on that'll never ever not be going on and it will consume us. But there is an opportunity, and God's created this into our fabric as human beings. There's an opportunity to push that back and have something that we get to do. Not that we have to do, but that we get to do. That can become for us that place where we rest and we find that re-energized nature. When I heard that quote, an island of get to in an ocean of have to, my mind went to the beach. How many of you, when you want to rest and relax, you go to the beach? That's if even in your mind, you go to the beach. Yeah, that's our happy place as a family. And yeah, I know what the beach is for a lot of people, and it's games, and it's playing, and it's fun, and it's music, and it's all that. And I can appreciate all that. But man, when I go to the beach, I want some significant time to be doing absolutely nothing. I mean, parking my butt in a chair, staring out into those waters, letting that sound just start washing over me, and my blood pressure starts dropping, all the concerns and emails start being forgotten. I start being transported. It feels like a Jimmy Buffett song all of a sudden. It's like it just starts happening, guys, right? It just starts happening. And you go, yes, this is what I need. What if God has something for you and I that's like that, but doesn't require the trek to Destin? What if there's something that God has for you and I on a regular basis that we could experience where we find that kind of rest? That's what God was after when he told his people, I want you to take a day out of 7 and observe it in a special way, different than all the other days. He was inviting them into a place of deeper relationship and a place of physical and spiritual rest and nourishment. Out of work, out of rest, when we are rested and in a rhythm of rest, work flourishes. Like we sometimes think we got to work and work and work and work and work, and there's so much work to do we can't stop working. But actually, out of work, out of rest, work flourishes. There's margin that's required to find purpose and meaning in life and to have our greatest effectiveness. When printing presses were first rolling, one of the thoughts originally was, well, paper is expensive. This whole process is expensive. And so we're going to put as many words on a page as we possibly can to minimize the amount of pages that we have to print. Just put a bunch of words on there. What they learned in doing that is that when we look at pages that are full of words from end to end, top to bottom, our eyes go crossed and we can't comprehend a thing. And that by having margin on a page, somehow our minds are able to focus. Guys, it's not just true with reading. It's true with life. It's true with work. When work is top to bottom, side to side, all we know and all we see, our eyes go crossed and everything goes nuts in life, and we can't find any meaning or purpose in what we're doing. Some of us say, I can't rest because there's a lot of work to do. I'll rest when the work is done. Maybe you've said it this way, I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? Well, here's the thing. I identify with that to a degree. I feel guilty when I rest often. I'm not saying I don't rest. I'm saying that often, most often, when I do, I feel guilty. I feel like I could be doing something else with this day. I could be doing something else with this time. I feel like I've got 159 house projects to do. I have to use this day to get 2 of them taken care of so that there aren't 167 by next Saturday, right? That's the way it feels. And I feel guilty if I stop and if I don't just keep going and going and going. But what God wanted to teach his people is that engineered into the human DNA that he created was leisure. Leisure. Leisure connects to the heart of God. Rest connects to the heart of God. Not accomplishing a thing in a day, a week, is close to the heart of God. In fact, he reminded Israel, you used to be slaves when you were in Egypt, and when you were slaves, there were no days off. And there were no holidays. You worked every single day. But now that you're my people, I've got a better idea for the way to do life. How about 6 days for work, 1 day set aside for you to be refreshed and renewed, and out of that day of rest, the other 6 days will flourish. Your work will flourish. What you'll find is if you live this principle, it's not just that your work flourishes, but that your relationships flourish. Out of regular rhythm of rest, you'll find relationships flourishing. The Sabbath was about pushing all the things that are supposed to be happening back so that you could concentrate and focus on the most important relationships you had. Your relationship with God, your relationship with your friends and family who were closest to you, and providing intentional space for that to happen. It's hard to make relationships happen without margin and space and time. Not every relationship works where you snap your fingers and you go, let's just have a great conversation right now, go. You've got to have room to have that. It's got to be organic. Author Noah Ben Shea said this. He said, it's the space between the notes that makes the music. It's a beautiful picture of the idea of the way life has to work. There's got to be a room and a margin to breathe. Sometimes Jamie will look at me and she'll go, we need a date night. And what she's telling me is like life's been going too fast and there's no big agenda here, but like I just want to create a block of time where we don't have to try to work in a conversation or two among all the other chores and things that we're trying to accomplish, whether it's work or with our kids or everything else. But what if there was a day that you could set aside to spend quality time with God, to catch up on reading, to sit and ponder where you are in your relationship with Him and what He might have for you next, to create time for relationships with other people who bear the image of God, of all the things that God has created, the image bearers of God, the people that are around you, to spend time with them. Out of rest, relationships flourish. Out of rest, faith flourishes. Faith flourishes. Sometimes what we want to have happen in our faith is being challenged by the fact that we are so thin on mental and emotional energy. That it's a big task to try to expect deep faith steps to take when we violate these principles of rest. It's kind of like, if I could kind of paint the picture this way, the way we understand hangry. You know when someone gets hangry and you're like, they can't think straight, they can't talk nice, they're just grumpy and hard to be around. That must be, I'm just hungry all the time. I guess I'm just hangry all the time. Just realizing that. You guys are in my counseling session, that's what's going on. There's a sleep version of it. It doesn't have a title like hangry. If it does, somebody tell me. I don't know what it is. But there's a sleep version of this. There's a rest version of this, where you become someone that you don't want to be when you are running thin, emotionally, physically. My youngest, Bryce, is like my poster child for this. If he stays out late a couple nights in a row, or is at a buddy's house and didn't get the sleep that he was supposed to get. The next night at about 7, 8 p.m., he becomes this otherworldly creature. And it's just like we have to warn him sometimes, like, bro, you need to shut up, because everything that's coming out of your mouth is adding days to the punishment. Like, no more. You are dug so deep at this point that like we're scheduling, we're scheduling the hearse, like kind of thing. Like, you need to stop. You need to stop. It's not going well for you. And he just can't. And he just keeps going and going. And he wakes up the next morning and he's like, man, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that. I don't know why I did that. And he's like a different person. And you're like, you needed rest. You were worn out. There's a faith version of this. One of the greatest pictures of it is Elijah in the Old Testament. He has this showdown on Mount Carmel where he's so connected to God that he prays that God would send fire down from heaven and just melt this altar and prove once for all that he's the one true God. I mean, he's going toe-to-toe with some spiritual enemies, with a king who's oppressive, with a wife who's vicious. And he wins the battle, but a few moments later, he leaves that thing, the situation, and he's done. And he's like, God, just take me out of this life now. I'm over. My life is over. Please, just take me now. And God says, bro, you need a nap. Lay down. Literally, that's what he tells him to do. Go take a nap. He wakes up, and when he wakes up, there's some warm bread that God made for him. And you're hungry too. So he eats that, and then he says, now go lay back down. He takes another nap. He's just out of gas. He is completely out of gas. And there is going to be no way that God can speak to him, move in him, or work through him because he's too run down. God says, you need rest. How many of us could experience a greater level of vibrancy in our faith life if we found ourselves in a rhythm where we were intentionally carving out space for rest and for connecting with God? Out of rest, faith flourishes. Here's lastly, out of rest, strength flourishes. Strength. This is where we almost have to work against the paradox. So we think, I got to work to be stronger. I got to accomplish more to be stronger. I got to move forward to be stronger. But this is where the paradox of faith and rest in God comes in, because relational trust has always been at the core of this command. This is God inviting us into trusting him that he can do more in us and through us if we rest one day in him and then work hard through him for 6 than we could working hard for 7 without him. This is him calling us to stop doing when there's plenty of work to be done, when there's all kinds of things that we could turn our attention to. He says, I want you to find rest and strength in me. Scripture points to this idea in a way that I think we sometimes miss, because we like to think of it or even ask for it in prayer like this: God, give me strength. Give me strength. But the way the Bible paints this conversation with God is not, God, give me, because we think of it like, God, you're over there, give it to me, and now I'll take it over here wherever I need to go. Thank you. You gave it to me. Now I'm back on my own again. I go. The picture that the Bible paints is this, though. Psalm 28:7, the Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him and he helps me. He doesn't give me strength. He is my strength. Do you understand how different of a viewpoint that is? To be asking God for something that he gives you and you then take versus something that he just intrinsically is. And you find that rest in him. When Gideon in the Old Testament, Gideon was a guy that was used to lead an army of 300 against a group of Midianites that numbered thousands upon thousands. And it's this incredible moment of faith and victory that we see in the Old Testament. God told Gideon that he wanted him to use him in this way. And Gideon says, I can't do this. I can't go. And God tells him, this is one of the most interestingly worded things, I think. He says, go in the strength that you have. And Gideon goes, which is none. I got no strength. I'm from the weakest clan. Like, God, you're sending me into battle. I got nothing. But God says this to him, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. You go with your strength. I'm coming with mine. God then becomes the strength for Gideon. It's in that same way Jesus invites us in a weary world, in a broken down world that's always go, 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 go. He says this, I didn't come to give you rest. I came to be your rest. And I invite you not to take something from me, but to find in me the rest that your soul so desperately needs. This is the Sabbath principle. That God doesn't simply give rest, He is our rest. And we find our rest in Him. We find our rest in our restlessness. Some of us are restless today because the effects and the brokenness and the pain from sin and rebelling against God has gotten so real in our life that we want to turn from it, but we don't know if God could possibly have us, that if His forgiveness or His grace could possibly be extended to our life. And Jesus says, come to me and you will find rest, because my finished work at the cross paid for your penalty. It paid for your sins. Some of us who are running through life at a pace that we can't possibly sustain, are looking for a way. Is there a better way? He says, yes, you can find rest in my rhythm. You can find rest in relationship with me. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. I'll give you rest. This invitation today is for all those who are ready to find their rest in Jesus, ready to take a step towards Him as their Lord and Savior. If you've never done that, if you want to talk to somebody about that, I invite you as we sing this song, either to respond by the code on your screen, come back to the back as we sing this next song. I'd be happy to pray with you and talk with you, explain to you how Jesus has become rest for me and how He can be for you. Maybe some of you are starting to think about this week, starting to think about the next weeks. And that's hopefully what is being jogged in your mind right now, where you can come to a place where you can say, you know what, maybe there's some things that need to be set down. Maybe there's some new priorities that need to be made, because we need to find a place in our life where this becomes more of a priority, where we can find our rest in God. I invite you, whatever work God's doing in your heart, as you see or feel Him prompting, that you would take that step of faith, that He would lead you and guide you to a better life. Would you stand with me and would you pray with me right now? Heavenly Father,